Hey YouTube, this isn't my primary channel. I don't know how you found me, but I'm glad you did. Just bear with my rambling here for the next probably 10 or 15 minutes. I guess you'll know when the time comes to watch this video, but I don't really know how long it's going to take because I'm trying not to go with a lot of notes. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You may know us as Mormons. We have kind of moved away from that name because it implies we're followers of Mormons, not followers of Christ, because we're Christians. So you may hear us talk about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or you may hear people talk to us or refer to us as Mormons. That's what we are. I'm a convert to the church, and it's kind of a long story how I got there. So here we go. In preschool and kindergarten, I went to a private Christian elementary school. It was all right. It was kind of cool. You know, I remember singing all these songs, and we had cots and recess and fun times, and we would go and, do sermons and do service projects at the nursing home behind it and all that fun stuff. Halfway through kindergarten, some kind of weird things happened there, so my parents moved me into the local elementary school. In that elementary class, I had a friend that attended a Lutheran church. So my mother and I, at some point, I don't know, probably third or fourth grade, started going there. My dad would come sometimes, but mostly it was just my mom. She played the bells in the choir, and, I went to all their activities and weekend activities and summer activities. And at some point we stopped going there. And then a couple years later, my father was diagnosed with cancer. At this point in his life, he had been a state police officer for, I'd say, about 17 years, and he was in his 40s. So he had seen all kinds of things in the world. And as he started to face his own mortality and realized that there was a pretty good chance he was going to be dead, he wanted to find religion. So in the town I grew up in, there's, a bunch of churches. Small town, tons of churches. We went to my uncle's church, which was, as my parents would call them, Pentecostal holy rollers. Everyone has their beliefs. Some beliefs are different. Who am I to judge? But the faith healing and the speaking in tongues and the randomly in the aisles just didn't sit well with my father. He saw them as like con artists and, confidence men or whatever. So we kept looking at churches, and eventually we went to a United Methodist church that was 2 blocks from our house. He was happy with the 3 pastors there and really liked things. So we started going there, and in the United Methodist church, there's confirmation, which is when the children, formally join the church. I was probably 11, 12 years old as we were going through this program, and you have the pastor in there had these booklets that describe different religions. So we were exposed to Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and then Catholicism and other Christian denominations. As part of this, we also went to local congregations near us. We went and talked to the father at the local Catholic church, which was another block away. We drove 15, 20 minutes to the Plainfield Islamic Center, and we learned a little about Islam. We just talked about all these differences and then compared them to the United Methodist Church's teachings. And there was something just about all of these people. You have 1 million people in this faith and 1 billion people in this faith, and they all believe that something greater than them created everything, and that something greater than them cares about them. And as a science fiction fan, even at that age, it amused me, because it implied that everything wasn't an accident, that countless stars hadn't come and gone before our star to create the heavy metals and just other isotopes and elements that are needed to create our star and then to create our planets around that star. And that life didn't just happen as 2 random chemicals coming together and creating a protein, and then that protein somehow evolved into life, and that life evolved into multicellular life, and then that multicellular life developed intelligence, and ultimately you have humans. And I liked that that it wasn't an accident. There's septillions of stars, and space is an incredibly cold and lonely place. And it was nice to think that we existed because something wanted us to, someone or several someones, because you have polytheism and monotheism, and you have concepts in Buddhism that kind of relate to these things. And it was just neat. So chugging along, liking this church, going to all the programs. Then my father dies of cancer 12 days before my 13th birthday. Oddly enough, on March 11th. It was kind of weird. I didn't understand this. I watched him die literally right in front of me in a room full of crying police officers that are supposed to be these, stone-faced, serious people. And it didn't sit well with me. Why would a supreme being just snuff out a consciousness? Why would it take it from its loved ones and from its life and from everything it was doing? I had no experience for death aside from my gerbil Geronimo dying and then another dog of ours running away. This was the only real loss in my life up to this point. I had seen a dead body or two at a funeral parlor, but it wasn't someone I knew. It was just some random person. And I didn't know how to process that, especially as a teenager when you're already, in a weird place, because things are changing and you're starting to get this big sense of self, and you are the authority in your life and you want it your way, and you think you're cool and you can make your own decisions, and then just someone dies and you're like, why would you do that? So a couple months later, I go to this week-long outreach ministry. I believe it was in Tennessee. It's called Mountaintop. It still exists as of earlier this year. And in it, it's basically a vacation Bible camp, except during the day you go out and do service. We built a shed for a family, and it was supposed to be a shed, but it was very clear that their kids were going to live in it. And we built a deck, and we processed a couple acres of overgrown lawn for an elderly woman, and just stuff like that. This is a really economically depressed area, and you just go and you show them that you're willing to do work for them. Well, this was the first time I had ever been away from my family. And it's, in June, and my father died in March, and the school ended, and then like the next day or that weekend, we went off to this thing. And I made my mom come and get me before the week was up, because I had all these emotions just going through me, and I was mad at God. Why would he do this? And that's the point where I turned my back on religion. A couple years earlier, in 95 or 96, the movie The Craft came out. It's about 4 high school-aged women. They are witches. It's an okay movie, and it's just been rebooted with a younger cast. So it's something that had some sort of cultural impact, that it's still around. And the internet was this useful tool at the time, but it was nowhere like it is today. And search engines were nothing like Google. But we managed to find, my friend and I that watched this movie, these web rings and online Book of Shadows and, all this stuff, doing like Gardnerian Wicca. And there were authors like Silver Ravenwolf that had spells like owie fix, you're the fairy that I pick, bring me healing, come right quick. That's supposed to magically heal you. And as a teenager, and you'd seen this in this movie with these, 4 attractive women, and they were cool and they had all these cool powers. You think that this stuff might be real, and you can like read one of these books or these websites and like do this stuff. And that kind of got me and my friend, who was a Quaker at the time, back into like looking at other religious beliefs. And we started looking at all these pagan and neo-pagan and reconstructionist pagan beliefs that were loosely based on like Celtic and Norse and even Greco-Roman deities. And that was kind of cool. And it got me thinking about stuff again. And we looked at some of the Druid organizations that existed at the time and still do, like ADF and OBOD, the Order of Bard Ovates and Druids. And they had some literature you could get through mail order and stuff. And it made us start thinking about, if there was something greater than us or some external force that actually had some sort of coherent control over reality. And we kind of, messed around with that for a couple of years in high school. And then I was about 15. We started going to lots of punk shows and local rock shows. We had a couple good venues here in town that were pretty much where we ended up every weekend. And before I could drive a car legally, I was drinking and using recreational drugs like marijuana and LSD. And we were, robo-tripping. I don't know if it's still a thing, but we would get the Robitussin, the right one, and, drink it and get a little loopy from it because it's got an alcohol content, and the drugs would kind of, alter your perception a little. And that just kind of became our life for a few years, mine especially, and some of my newer friends. And, I didn't really think about religion much while we were doing all of that. And then I found this group called Joy of Satan, done by this woman who uses an alias called Maxine Dietrich. Turns out it's a neo-Nazi movement. Didn't know that actually until this year. I kind of had suspicions, but I was thinking about my religious history and wanted to look things up and wanted to see if they were still around, and they are. And I saw all of these things linking them to a prominent leader in a neo-Nazi group. So right off the bat, it's not the greatest group. What they taught was somewhat parallel to what the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches. It taught that there was a premortal existence where groups in heaven were watching man as Adam and Eve interact on the earth, and they saw that, it per their story. This is not a teaching of the church. This is purely of this entity of the adversary, that there was this war in heaven that started to form out because Lucifer, who they say is the brother of Jesus, and the Son of God, wanted to make men their equals, while God and Jesus wanted to keep man suppressed and, have him subservient. If you're familiar with Islam, you'll also see this with the jinn. The jinn were supposed to worship Adam and Eve. They were this little weakened subclass, and then there's a whole mythos there. But with the Joy of Satan, they taught that. And if you worshipped Satan, he would help you, and he gave us knowledge. And so I started looking into this, and, I was already not in the greatest of places. And then this stuff, and life got kind of lame, got kind of crappy. It was interesting. It was not good. So I had this at least exposure to some sort of premortal existence, which you don't really get in other Christian denominations or even in other religions. You kind of get it with like reincarnation, but it's not really comparable. So I got away from that, and I started looking back at Christian denominations again, and none of them really felt right. But then I discovered Islam again. I vaguely remembered it as a child, and I went back to it at, 18, 19 years old. And something stood out there. We have all of these prophets in the Old Testament, and we have Jesus in the New Testament, and they're receiving revelation from God, and then it just stops. Well, Islam taught that the Prophet Muhammad was a prophet of God and started receiving revelation again, hundreds of years after Jesus passed away, after he was crucified for our sins. And that was interesting. And the fact that there was over 1 billion Muslims in the world, and probably hundreds of millions of them are devout and pray, multiple times a day, that really got my interest. And there's a lot of science in the Quran, if you kind of read between the lines, and it's stuff that we didn't really know until more modern times. So you see some sort of thing there that kind of calls to you, and you go to it and you read it. And I was mesmerized by it and interested in it. So I started going to local masjids or mosques. And I met with this guy, and, he showed me how to do the prayer and, everything. And I started going, like, not every day, but several times a week. Usually on the weekends I'd go and I'd hang out and I'd talk to the guys. And, there's people like Yusuf Islam that, are semi-famous, and all of these, there was tons of Muslim podcast content at the time, which didn't really exist for Christians, because with a lot of Christian denominations, you've got small churches that are mostly independent or they're loosely affiliated with a larger group. But with Islam, it was like these guys, these imams, they got a lot of time on their hands, so they would create all this content, and I would just listen to these lectures and over and over and over. And I did that for several months, and then I wanted it to be something, but it never felt right. So I go back to looking at religion, and I was familiar with Buddhism. I had dabbled with it on and off. I think by that point, Richard Gere already had a couple of Buddhist books out because he's friends with the Dalai Lama or whatever. And the Dalai Lama had, several books out. And it just seemed kind of strange. You'd have to go through all of these lives and continue to refine yourself over and over and over until you could progress into something else. And that just didn't, if a universe was created by something grander, it just doesn't seem like that would be the solution. So, I skipped that. And then one day I'm reading a bunch of Jules Verne books from Project Gutenberg. You can get free books that are out of copyright protection or whatever, trademark protection, copyright, I think. And I'm reading them, and I'm reading all of the translated works of Jules Verne. And I get to Around the World in 80 Days. And there's a chapter where Passepartout is on a train, and it's going through Salt Lake City, if I remember correctly. And I believe it's at the beginning of the chapter. It explains that, elders so-and-so and so-and-so of the Church of Jesus Christ are going to be giving a lecture on Mormonism in the dinner car or something at a specific time. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember seeing commercials for those on TV, in the 90s. And in the town I grew up in, a lot of people had stickers on their doors that said, no Mormons or Jehovah Witnesses, please. And in fact, the house I was living at the time from the previous owner had one of those stickers on the storm door, because it was a small town, so you'd get a lot of people coming door to door, which was used heavily by the Mormon Church and it was used by a lot of people. We even had Baptists come to our door. But it's a primary tactic at the time for the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to go door to door, and that's how they'd expose themselves to people. And, so I was like, that's curious. And I went to the website. It was way different than it is today, because this is, probably late 2003, early 2004. And I saw you could request a free Book of Mormon, so I did. Weeks go by, nothing comes. So I request another one. More weeks go by, nothing comes. I think I requested one a third time, and same thing. So, having been on the internet at this point for a decade, basically, just a little less than a decade, I was pretty savvy. So I found ldschat.com. I think it still exists. It did a few months ago. And I'm in this chat room, and, I'm like, how do I get one of those free Books of Mormon? And, someone pops into the room, and they go, well, first they ask me where I live. And I'm like, well, I'm in Indianapolis. And they go, oh, so am I. My sister and brother and I are going to this thing called Institute tonight. Well, it's Institute. That sounds kind of weird. Is that kind of Scientology-ish, with their seasteading institute or whatever it's called? And I'm like, But she describes what it is, and I'm like, oh, so it's just like Bible study, cool. And she goes, well, it starts in an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. Do you want to meet us over there? And I'm like, maybe. What's the address? Mapquest.com. And I put in the address, and it's literally right down the road. I had to drive 2 blocks, go straight, turn right, and I was basically there. So, sure, I'll go. And I meet them. And just sitting in the Institute class, I don't remember anything that was talked about specifically, but I remember thinking, this is interesting, because I had read that they had restored prophets that started with Joseph Smith, and that really spoke to me, because why would God just stop talking to people? Why would he be so involved in this group of people's lives and then just stop? So they had my interest already. And then I learned, there's the Book of Mormon, but then there's Doctrine and Covenants, and then there's the Pearl of Great Price. There's these scriptures that are a mix of several groups of people in Israel and then the ancient Americas somewhere. We don't know specifically where, and it's not worth, guessing, because it doesn't matter. And then more modern scripture through Revelation with like Doctrine and Covenants that was, given to us in the early restored church in the 1800s. And it's like, yes, this makes sense. So, I hang out with these people, and I say, yeah, I'll come back the next week. And I start doing the missionary discussions at their house. And, I knew it wouldn't go over well at home. I'd have to my mother would be like, what is this? And I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. And I'm like, well, can I do these talks at your guys' house? And they were like, sure. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. Is this a call? And they had a school bus in their backyard. So we did the talks in the school bus in their backyard. And I met with Elder Burdick and Elder Nielsen, and we did the talks. And some people take months or even years to get through the talks. And I was like, can I see you guys tomorrow? Can I see you guys in 3 days? When can I see you again? I want to get through these things. And they're drawing their little, bridge diagram and showing me, how Jesus, bridges the gap that, saves us. And they're telling me all these things, and Iron Rod and Book of Mormon and Nephi, Lehi, and Moroni. And I'm like, cool, sign me up. I want to get baptized. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. This sounds true. It sounds like it's the thing. If you've ever watched Starship Troopers, would you like to know more? Yes, I would like to know more. Tell me everything. Let me in. So I get baptized. I'm baptized on a Saturday. Sunday, I get confirmed. And then Monday, ring, 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 ring. And I'm like, I get out my Razor V3 and I open it up and it's blue. And I'm like, hello? And they're like, hi, I'm a missionary from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Have you had a chance to look at the Book of Mormon we sent you? And I'm like, oh, I never got one. But funny story, I was just baptized Saturday. And I don't know what that was about. And this is pure speculation, but I think if I would have got a Book of Mormon in the mail, I would have briefly looked at it, because it's just a paper book. This is a try here. But same kind of concept. The Book of Mormon that the missionaries use is just a flimsy blue one. And I would have looked at it and I would have been like, oh, what is this? Golden plates? Huh? Yeah, no. And I would have thrown it away. But because I had to go for it and I had to, find people, and I was exposed to that institute class, I think that's why I joined the church. I think if I would have got the Book of Mormon, it wouldn't have happened. So I think the call was just like a little, nod at me saying, hey. But, that's how I joined the church. And then fairly quickly, which unfortunately happens with a lot of converts, it's overwhelming and there's all of these things and you don't know anything. And, you meet people like my wife who served a mission, and her family has, held all of these callings pretty much in everything. And they've grown up in it their whole life. And they forget that these terms are wholly unique often to the church. And you just get overwhelmed and you don't know what anyone's talking about. And there's not really a good resource. There's a very dated book, but I didn't know it existed at the time, that just goes through and tells you what all these things are. But now you can go on the website and it's a lot better. So what happened? I just became inactive. And then, years went by. And I was still, I still knew it was probably the truth and everything. And it just kind of sat there in the back of my mind. And I went about with my life. I got involved in a nightclub and the owner, and we got up to all kinds of shenanigans and craziness. And, I almost died. I had a hypokalemic event that got my potassium so low, I was able to move my hands about this much. and I was paralyzed. And fortunately, I was living with my mother at the time. And as I laid on the floor, I managed to sit up enough in the bed that I rolled out onto the floor, and I'm laying like this, and like a half-ripped pretzel. And I'm shouting for help, and I can't move, and I'm panicky. And I realized I was kind of going down that bad path again. I was going out and getting drunk every night, and I was, drinking a fifth, which is an obscene amount of alcohol. And I was doing that like nightly for a long time. And I'm laying there on the floor paralyzed. And I'm like, if you get me up off of this floor, I will change my life. Of course I didn't. I got up off the floor with the help of several EMTs and firefighters and got treated in the hospital. But I did start to shift away from the club scene. And my friend Ravi at the time, I told him, I couldn't be a part of his life anymore. And started thinking about religion again. There weren't really any good church-related podcasts at the time, but I was already a big podcast listener. But I started looking at the church's monthly magazines again. And, then a few years went by, and I started going to church again. I was now, like 29, 30. And it wasn't so awkward being this convert like I was when I was 20, and I got thrown in with a bunch of other young adults that had grown up in the church and had either just served missions or were just going to serve missions in the near future. And I was able to just kind of be the wallflower. And I started going to my ward again. And, I'm hanging out. And I'm like, okay. So I'm going to these mid-singles firesides, which involved 3 stakes. A stake is kind of like the equivalence of a state. And then a ward is kind of like your town. So you go to a ward, but then several wards make up a stake. And for mid-singles, out here in Indiana, there's not a whole lot of us. So 3 stakes that probably had, 30-ish, 25 to 30-ish wards meeting would have 20 people show up that were single and, in the mid-single ages. And at one of these, there were 3 stake patriarchs, which it's a calling in the church. And you can go to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website and just type in, patriarch or patriarchal blessing, and you can kind of get an idea of what they do. And they were talking about the importance of your patriarchal blessing, which is a little bit of revelation. Some will say it's just a cold reading, and I entirely went into it thinking, like just adamant that I was going to be asked a bunch of questions, and then, it was going to be like a cold reading, and then they would tell me what I wanted to hear. And I even got the paper back after he told me things, and I had the impression while he was saying it, when Patriarch Hammond was saying these things, I'm like, oh, you got this from what you told me. This is baloney. And then I got the paper in the mail. They mail you a transcript. They record it so you can have it to look back at over your life. I thought the same thing. But it's basically, these are the things that if you live a good life and you do what you're supposed to do in the church and accept your callings, these are the things that are probably going to happen to you in your life. And I'm like, yeah, right. It made all kinds of promises. And I'm like, Well, one of them was this crazy idea that I would marry one of Heavenly Father's young daughters and she would be my wife. And I'm like, oh, you're full of it. These people that show up to the mid-singles are all divorced and have a bunch of kids. And, I have nothing in common with them. And, well, my wife's right here off of camera. And she was a member of the church that served a mission. So when this thing happened on my patriarchal blessing, I was like, these things are crazy. But part of me was like, just take the church seriously. So I moved into this new ward. I got the patriarchal blessing within a week, either before or after moving into the ward. And when I moved into the ward, I don't like change. So I'm into this ward, and the very first day I'm there, this guy is telling this story in the Elders Quorum meeting, which is the men's group meeting. And he tells me, he tells everyone there, he says, Well, then brother so-and-so wasn't feeling so good. So me and brother Lloyd, and my ears perk up because the Lloyds are who I did my discussions in their backyard. And he's like, brother Lloyd and I, we, wanted to let this brother go fishing. So we made a little pond in brother Lloyd's garage and stocked it with some fish so he could come over, sit in his wheelchair and fish. And I'm just like, that's such a weird story. And then I go up to him after and I go, this brother Lloyd, did he have 2 daughters and a son? Yeah. Did he live off of Lyndhurst over at such and such? And he goes, yeah. And I go, I did my discussions in his backyard in a bus. And to me, this was God saying, you are home. This is the right place. Here's this thing. Like, what are the chances of that? I meet this girl in a chat room. She happens to live down the road from me. She's going to a meeting that afternoon. I go to the meeting. And then years later, when I'm just dipping my toes back in the water of the church, I move to a new ward. Like, I move a city, and then bam, here's a person that is telling a story about that family. So then I start taking things a little bit more seriously. I get the priesthood. I accept a calling. I get my endowment so I can go to the temple. And then I install the mutual dating app, which is like the Tinder of members of the church. And I'm swiping and swiping. And this girl matches me in another state. I'm like, whatever. And we start talking. And then, a year and a half-ish later, we're married. And that was at the beginning of this year. And it's never easy being a member of the church because there's lots of things asked of you, and we're supposed to help people, and you don't always want to do it. And then, you have your normal obstacles and hurdles too. My wife and I scheduled our wedding in the temple December of last year for May of this year, and it's 2020 when I'm recording this. So the temple's closed, and we can't get married. So instead of getting sealed in the temple in May, we have to get married in the church meeting house parking lot with just her parents and just my mother and a random fox that trots by that I'm the only one that saw, and I swear there was a fox. If I've told you this story, there was really a fox. I promise there was a fox. No one saw it. I saw it. It was cool. Foxes are creepy, but it was cool. I digress. So we had to do that. And then, we lost 3 temple sealing dates, and COVID ravaged the lands, and et cetera, et cetera. Whatever survivors of COVID are viewing this in the distant future, I was there. I was there when the toilet paper vanished and everything. But we finally got sealed. It took month after month after month. And then finally, towards the end of November, we were able to get sealed. And then, of craziest things, I was called to give a talk at stake conference, which is a church meeting that replaces the normal church meetings that involves every ward in a stake. So, could be hundreds, could be thousands of people, depending on your geographical location and the population density of members of the church. And I gave a much shorter version of this talk there. And if you had told me before I joined the church, or even when I first joined the church, that I would be married to a member of the church, that I would be sealed in the temple, that I would speak at stake conference, that I would accept a calling in the church because I like my free time, that I would be sitting in my living room in a house I bought with my wife, 2 things I never thought would happen, and I'd be talking to the internet, rambling incessantly to the internet about how I became a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I would have told you were crazy. But I believe that the church is true. It makes sense to me that we would have ongoing revelation, that we would have living prophets. If God's going to create an entire universe, which is truly unfathomably large, even our solar system is so impossibly large. Our planet is so incredibly large. You could spend your whole life traveling the planet and never set foot everywhere. For all of that to exist, there has to be a supreme being. And I don't think he would just abandon us. I don't think he would be involved in our lives and then just be like, all right, guys, I'm out. And, go take a coffee break or whatever. So I'm a Mormon. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm bearded. I'm tattooed. I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I've done drugs. I've done a laundry list of drugs. But God loves me and he loves you. I don't know who's watching this. I don't know anything about you. But I can guarantee you that God loves you. I would hope if you're a member of the church, this reminds you of the covenants you've made, that it reminds you that if there's a convert in your ward, they may not know everything and they might have a different experience than you. And, don't be afraid to go up and say hi, or, to be their friend, or if they're your ministering assignment to, reach out to them, because they might drift away like I did. And it might be, a decade until they come back, or they might never come back. And that's just unfortunate. And if you're not a member of the church and, you're waiting for this video to end so you can type, oh, you're in a cult down in the comments because you're an anti-Mormon or something, then, I can't stop you from doing that. But I would hope you would actually listen to what I'm saying and reevaluate what you've been told or what you feel or what you think, and just subjectively look at the material the church has and look at other religions and try to find what makes sense for you. And I think it's our church, and maybe you will too. And maybe you're an investigator and you think the church is true, but you're just looking for a little more information. There's all kinds of stuff out there. Talk to the missionaries. If you're a man, ask to speak to the Elders Quorum president. If you're a woman, ask to speak to the Relief Society president. If you're a teen, ask if you can talk to some of the teens in your ward, or, whatever. If you're divorced, that's okay. There's lots of divorced people in the church that have converted in, or due to unfortunate circumstances, find them that way. There's alcoholics in the church. There's people that struggle with drug addiction. There's people that, have probably killed people in self-defense or in, manslaughter or whatever. Whoever you are, whatever you are, there's a place for you here. Just do what you have to do, learn about us, think about us, reach out in the comments. I'll try to pay attention to these in perpetuity, or, just find me on social media. I'm Ryan Mercer on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm easy to find on Twitter. There'll be links, down below. Look for My Ugly Mug on Facebook. Send me a message. If it pops up, I'll read it and try to respond as quickly as I can. But that's why I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've probably rambled a really long time here. And I did have a quote here. And in the April 1925 General Conference, which is like our church-wide meeting that's held twice a year, where we, have talks from the leaders of the church and sometimes receive revelation and instruction. One of the leaders of the church at the time, J. Golden Kimball, said, "There has never been a time in my life or any period of my life where I felt better spiritually and more willing to do my duty and serve the Lord and labor for his cause and for his interests." And J. Golden Kimball was a colorful man with colorful language and a mostly colorful history. And I feel what he said there. I don't always want to do stuff for other people. I like sitting on the couch and watching television, but I'm making these efforts, like this video, to make myself accessible, or to share and to do my part to help God's message get out there. I don't know if anyone's made it this far in the video, but I would just ask that if you're a member of the church, just, don't ever stop being every member a missionary. Keep that mindset. And if you're against the church, I would ask you to just reflect on why you're against the church and really evaluate those feelings. And if you still have them, that's fine. That's your prerogative. Like, if you want to be rabidly against us, or, you know, indifferent to us or for us, I don't care. That's your journey, your decision. You know, you got to do all that. I can't tell you, you know, do this or else. You're going to do what you want to do. And if you're investigating the church, just keep doing it. Keep reading. Talk to members. Pray. Read your scriptures. You know, there's 3 works right there that there's nothing bad in them. Nothing in there says, you know, go kill children and adulter. And it's the same kind of good advice that's in the Bible, that's in a lot of other scriptures like the Quran and, you know, the various Hindu texts. It's a guidebook to a moral compass that has an underlying theme that tells you what you need to do per our beliefs to have salvation, to have peace, to prosper in the life that comes after this. Just, you know, read it, look for the answers, pray. I say these things in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.